Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Shannon Burth, and today I'll be using SPSS to demonstrate how to test a relationship using a cross-tabulation with chi-square. I will be using the simulated data set that accompanies the second edition of the textbook, Quantitative Research Methods in Communication, The Power of Numbers for Social Justice. Thanks for joining us. As we discussed in Chapter 9, the second main group of statistical tests looks at whether two or more variables relate to each other, or conversely, whether they're independent from one another. A cross-tabulation with chi-square test is used to look for relationships between two or more nominal level variables. You can find the function for chi-square tests in SPSS under Analyze, Descriptive Statistics, and crosstabs. Doing so is going to give us this dialog box where we can select the nominal values we'd like to include in this test. If there's a variable that we want to consider independent or the predictor variable, the typical convention is to place it in the column section. In our case, we're going to be using gender identity as our predictor, so we can find that in our list of variables. I typically like to do variable names, and there we go. We have gender right here. Send that over to columns, like I said. And next, we're going to be looking for our dependent variable, and that typically will go in this rows section here. We're going to use the measure of regular and non-regular video game players as our dependent variable. So I'll head over to our list here and look for VG yes, no. That's going to go in our rows. Next thing we're going to click is statistics, and it's going to give us a dialog box with more options. We'll click chi-square to make sure that's the test we're running. Click continue. And then there's one last step that we want to take before we actually click ROK and have SPSS run the test. We'll go into cells here. Under percentages, we're going to click column. We'll click continue. And that's going to produce not just the counts and frequencies in each cell of the crosstab table, but also the percentage of respondents who chose each option of the variable in question. Now we can click OK. So now we can see in our output from the cross-tabulation with chi-square test of whether respondents' gender identity was associated with whether or not they indicated they were a regular video game player. So in this output, I want to point out a few things. The first, this top left corner here represents the number of respondents and then also the percent of the total sample size that identified as male and as regular video game players. See, we have it at the intersection of male and yes, I play video games regularly. This whole first column here shows the distribution of those who identified as male across both categories. So yes, I regularly play video games, and no, I do not regularly play video games. The entire top row shows the number of respondents that identified as regular video game players across all gender identities that were present in the sample. And this is exactly what crosstabs does. It shows the overlap between two variables. In our case, the variables are gender identity, and if they identify as either regular or non-regular video game players. To report this relationship and its level of statistical significance, we're going to head down to this chi-square test box down here at the bottom, and we're going to look at this first line of results here. We have our chi-square value, our degrees of freedom, and our significance level. And that's all we need. Our results will read chi-square equals 102.22, so this value rounded up, comma, degrees of freedom equal 3, comma, again, p is less than 0.001. Just like T and F statistics, chi-square is a bit difficult to interpret on its own, although larger values usually are associated with statistically significant p level. The degrees of freedom in chi-square is calculated by the number of cells, minus 1, multiplied by the number of rows, minus 1. The p-value in our output is the most important component then. It says the odds of observing the association between gender identity and regular video game playing present in our results when there is no such association in the population is less than 1 in 1,000. Thus, we can safely conclude that there is an association between the two variables, and the association has a particular direction as well. Those who identify as male are more likely to report being regular video game players compared to those who identify as female. Although we have 3 transgender respondents and 1 non-binary respondent in our sample, we cannot conclude anything about video game playing among people with those gender identities since there's far too few of them in our sample. This is an illustration then of how extra efforts to obtain more diverse samples are necessary to fully test something like gender differences in an inclusive manner. In fact, the math behind chi-square tests is actually thrown off when you have too many cells with not very many counts in them, just like we have in our case. That's why if you see down here, we actually have a footnote that SPSS gives us. The rule is that no more than 20% of cells should have an expected frequency of 5, whereas we have 50% of our cells doing that. Before we place too much value on this result, then, we need to correct the problem. In our case, we could do that only by testing for associations between gender identity and regular video game playing among those who identify as male and female, since we don't have enough respondents in the other identity groups. Check out video 1 in the series to learn more about transforming variables. Then consider practicing your SPSS skills, where you can recode gender identity into 2 larger groups that we see in the dataset, male and female, and then run the cross-tabulation with chi-square tests again. That's all I have for you today. Thanks for joining us, and be sure to check out all the other videos in this series, but also come back for our next video where we're going to learn how to do Pearson's correlation in SPSS. Thanks for joining.